Do you have an example of using a linear layout in your app?
Well, even here, this cluster of 3 cards is a horizontal linear layout where we just add child views, like 3 cards, and then we set layout width to 0 deep and layout weight to 1, and essentially it instructs a linear layout to take however much width it has at runtime and distribute it evenly based on the relative weights, distributed evenly between all the child views in that group. So that's one example. And another example would be over here that you have new and updated games, and the more button, which is a cluster header, it's also a simple horizontal linear layout. So when things are simple, you don't necessarily want to start writing custom layouts. Don't just use relative layout everywhere because it's more versatile than linear layout, for example. That's just overkill for simpler things.
So when a designer gives you a mock, how do you go about starting to build that app?
So hopefully at that point, like we talked, we have not just one mock, but rather at least 2 or 3 that show how the design scales between small screens and large screens. And then I want to identify building blocks. So if we talk about something like a card, which appears in a lot of places in the app, I wouldn't want necessarily to start like implementing a lot of variants of the same card based on if it needs to show a small image or a big image, or maybe show a 1-line title instead of 2-line titles. So I'm trying to identify these blocks and implement them as standalone classes, standalone layouts, and then start building on top of those. So you start from text view, image view, spinner, and whatnot to build smaller blocks. And then hopefully you are able to keep on taking those small blocks and build larger blocks while reusing the same basic set of blocks. And what's nice about it is, even though you spend maybe a little bit more time up front, it becomes easier, especially if the design is consistent in how it applies its language to evolve the app and to add new features. If the design is consistent, then you keep on seeing the same blocks being used in different configurations again and again. And then that's where your initial investment starts paying off, where you don't treat implementation of a new screen as a brand new thing, but rather maybe 50, 60, 70, however much percent is already there. Maybe it needs a little bit tweaking with colors or maybe typography or whatnot. But hopefully, if the design is consistent, then the implementation is also easier to move forward if you already built for that. And it also becomes easier to apply a redesign just on the visual level. If you want to tweak colors, if you want to tweak typography, if you want to add maybe like we did in Lollipop, where you have these ripple effects when you press something. If you have a few pieces that you keep on reusing, your styles, your layouts, then you do that visual refresh in a fewer number of places, and then hopefully they get applied consistently everywhere. So for me, I want to place the focus at the beginning on getting the data right, especially for an app that is getting its data from external sources. And then do closer to the pixels, refine the pixels once you have the data, to do the grid, to do the typography, colors, animations, transitions, whatnot, however much time you have to spend on that. And I think it would be the same if you have something like a Twitter client. Like, you can start by pixel perfecting your layouts with some fake data, and then you discover that you know nothing about fetching the data from Twitter, and it takes you the next 3 months just to fetch the data. Or just an example. So I prefer to start from the data. I think about this as an iceberg, where you see the pretty pixels as maybe 5–10% above the surface. And then there's a lot of work going below the surface, if you will, to support that.
You mentioned the tip of the iceberg is what people see. So what exactly is going on below the surface? How do you see the Google Play app?
What happens below the surface is, first of all, to get the data from the network. So you have, authenticate to the server and get the data, and then maybe to cache it locally, so that the next time you go, you go from the stream into the details page and back into the stream, we should be using cached data, cached images, so that we don't put too much strain on the battery, and also the app already shows the information that it has. Then you have support for multiple accounts. Then you have maybe persisting a few bits here and there in the database. Then we have the billing flows, which is most of that work is done on the server to integrate with different payment methods. And then there's the work on the client as well. Another big part of the Play Store is downloading and installing apps. And games, we are, on the Play Store side, we are in charge of downloading, installing, updating apps, and so that's another big chunk of, once again, pretty much all of these have their surface bits, which are pixels on the screen, and then there's a lot of work going below the surface to bring that information for the right account and to put that on the screen.
It's clear that you've worked on many different iterations of Google Play app. How do you keep up to date with the latest news in Android?
There's a lot of information on Google Plus from very active Android developers who put out a lot of tutorials. And just from different blogs, sometimes I don't necessarily go and read deeply a certain series about like Recycler View or a view page or whatnot, or like how to configure the toolbar and action bar. I kind of try to put it like that I know that there's a lot of information in there, and then when I do need that deep level of information, then I go to those resources.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Kirill. I think our students will really enjoy hearing your perspective on what it's like to be an Android app engineer.